Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Nivi Jaswal, the founder of the Virsa Foundation and the JIVINITI research program. Connecting the Dots is all about whole food plant-based living, intersectional veganism, and matters key to public and planetary health. Today, we have the wonderful Dr. Laila Kassam with us. She has a deep background in international development, is an acclaimed author, a vegan activist, and a co-founder of the Animal Think Tank in the UK. Welcome, Laila, to the show.
Thank you, Nivi. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, so let's start with your personal story. How did you go vegan?
Oh, well, I think that was I'll start in 2010. I started meditating and getting really interested in spirituality and wanting to live a non-violent life and to live a mindful life and a conscious life. So yeah, I started meditating, and when it came to eating a burger or a steak, I would look at my plate and suddenly for the first time see what it actually was, which was the corpse of a tortured animal. So I went vegetarian, and it took me, I'm ashamed to say, 3 years to kind of, fully realize that, the dairy industry and the egg industry is all part of this same oppressive, violent system. And so I went vegan 3 years later. And as it happens, when I went vegetarian, I had just started my PhD, and I was looking at the impact of fish farming on poverty in Ghana. And so I think there was this kind of thing in my head, which was like, well, I'm sort of looking at animal exploitation for a good thing. And so I feel like I couldn't quite make the step to veganism. And when I handed in my PhD then I went vegan. And so I think something shifted unconsciously in my mind. So yeah, that was quite a while ago now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned that you were doing your PhD and you were already invested in this, big academic program. Obviously, you weren't vegan, but you achieved this vegan consciousness sometime during that time. That's really interesting. Did that involve changing the topic of your research, or did you just end up blending it somehow in and bringing your vegan ethic to the work that you were doing back then?
No, I mean, so throughout my PhD, I was vegetarian, and when I was in Ghana doing my field research, I was going to fish farms and I was watching them being harvested, and I wasn't eating fish, and it was so difficult because I was like, but I'm working with poor farmers. They don't have a choice. At least that's what I thought at the time. So somehow I just kind of, I just contained it, or thought, well, I have the privilege, they don't have the privilege. And to a certain extent, I still believe that. I think we've all got different abilities or different barriers to being able to live in alignment with our values. And yeah, so once I'd finished and I'd gone vegan, I became like this expert in fish farming in Africa for poverty and food security. And that was how I was making my living. So I carried on consulting on these projects, which were focused on food security and poverty, but through things like fish farming. And I carried on for a few years, just getting increasingly more upset and disgusted. And for many more reasons than just the sort of my vegan ethic. I was also really feeling that the whole development industry was immoral and neo-colonial. And so in 2017, so I guess like 4 years after I'd gone vegan, I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it anymore. And I stopped, and luckily my partner's amazing. And he was like, finally, you've come to your senses. And I ended up spending about 6 months in bed reading and trying to put all of the jigsaw pieces together of like my animal liberation kind of ethics, what I'd been experiencing in development and kind of like human oppression, and also, making the connections with our destruction of the natural world. So that was a real, ending my development career and then taking space to really reflect on my experiences over the last 15 years was a really, really important, and like it was an inflection point in my life, really.
Right, clearly. And then you started working on a project which was a book project. You're an acclaimed author. You co-authored this book with your father, Dr. Kassam. And I'm just going to pull it up on the screen. Rethinking food and agriculture. And this is I've had the opportunity and the honor of reading this book written by you and Dr. Kassam. And what I found amazing was this is one of those unique books where you read about international development, you read about food systems, food transformation, but you also read about animal ethics and veganism and whole food, plant-based and veganic farming. Now that's something unique, and that's the first. Tell us about this. Tell us about this project.
Well, firstly, Nivi, I think you're the only one who acclaims me as an author. I really don't like that label because I co-edited that book with my father, and it's filled with chapters from amazing forward-thinking activists and academics and practitioners. There's so much wisdom in that book, and it was just such a privilege to be able to help to bring that together. And so I often say that it's the book that I wanted to read and I couldn't find. And in that period when I sort of like decided to end my career in development and sort of try and connect the dots between all these issues, I was reading amazing books, but just on like one aspect, on animal liberation, on food system transformation, which didn't include an animal liberation ethic. Except and like environmental issues that didn't include domesticated animals in their circle of like moral concern. So it's the book that I wanted to read but couldn't find, and it brings together animal liberation perspectives on development as neocolonialism, decentralizing power in the food system. Like we are functioning within a corporate food regime, and we have to decentralize power like that, and through things like food sovereignty and localization. We've got chapters challenging GMOs. There's so much in there, and as you say, there's quite a few chapters looking at sort of animal liberation, animal ethics. There's a chapter, a brilliant chapter by Nassim Nobari that looks at the role of social movements and grassroots social movements in creating transformative change for food systems, and looks at veganic agroecology. And there's a chapter by my sister, well, both my sisters actually, who are medics and lifestyle physicians, looking at the role of plant-based, or the scientific and clinical evidence underlying plant-based diets for both human and planetary health. So it was a family affair, let's say, and also just brought together some of my favorite voices from different sectors.
Yeah, I do remember, reading another chapter, which I believe you co-authored along with Jim Mason, and that talks about impact of domestication historically.
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, the chapter was really by Jim. It's based on his 1993 book called An Unnatural Order, and that was one of the books that I read when I was sitting in bed trying to work out how to view the world. And I would highly recommend it to everyone. It's just such a powerful book, and it looks at how we were more than 10,000 years ago before settled agriculture as sort of forager hunters, or mainly foragers, and the impact of when we started domesticating other animals and herding other animals, and the kind of the social stratification that came about because of that. The mentality of oppressing and exploiting other animals was kind of, soon we started to view women the way that we used to, that we currently view livestock, in inverted commas, as breeders, and also in terms of developing class and wealth categories, and the herding culture he talks about is very expansionary by necessity because of the land and water that's constantly needed, because it's very degrading, and so it requires sort of war and claiming claiming land, and and resources from others. So there's so much that has come about because of our domestication of other animals that I don't see in many places, or is even like acknowledged. And I think that's so much of part of the root causes actually of the multiple interconnected crises that we're facing right now. I mean, our domestication of other animals, like, okay, capitalism, the word capital, it comes from like heads of cows. The word for war comes from, Sanskrit for desire for more cows. I mean, it's so entangled with how we, with our current society and how we've set it up that it's really, really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're so right. So our monetary system, our I don't know, rules of kinship, inheritance, all of those somehow, and our definitions of progress, right? So when we talk about sustainable development goals and all of that international development vocabulary, it just feels as though it's very extractive in mindset, and we want to value extract out of things, and we then ascribe profit to that. And in doing so, we become delusioned about what might be the actual purpose of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So you co-founded Animal Think Tank to set a lot of those things right. Tell us about Animal Think Tank.
Right. Well, I mean, Animal Think Tank is looking at that, is really looking at the animal liberation piece. And we... our mission is to support the building of a powerful and broad-based social movement for animal freedom in the UK. And we are working towards a world where all individual animals have their rights to life, liberty, and security of person protected, both in law and embraced and respected by society. So we're really trying to bring about both legislative, so structural change, and cultural change, a shift in consciousness. I mean, ultimately, I think what we're trying to do, I mean, I don't know if other people in Animal Think Tank agree with me, but I feel that we're trying to change ultimately our relationship with other animals, and come back into right relationship with other animals, and also ourselves and each other and the natural world. It is all connected. So we co-founded, me and two others co-founded this a few years ago. We spent a year, the three of us, in a living room workshopping ideas, and then we got some funding and we started to grow. And yeah, we're now 7 and we're recruiting for another 4 currently. So by 2023, we're aiming to grow to about 30. And basically what we're about is we want to seed a social movement organization for other animals. And I often explain it like, if you think of Extinction Rebellion, we're doing the same for animal freedom. And with Extinction Rebellion, a group of them spent 18 months conceptualizing the DNA of their movement, the principles and values, the strategy, etc. And we're kind of in that stage at the moment.
All right, and you have openings. So people who around the world are welcome to, apply. I'm just going to put that on the screen. Tell us a little bit about these roles that you have.
So we are expanding right now, and so we've got, and I should say that I think the deadline has passed for all of them now. We've started interviewing this week. So we're recruiting for a political strategist, a social movement culture lead, and that's kind of my area. I look after culture in the organization, and so what is the culture of our movement going to be? What are the principles and values? What are the conflict transformation systems, the care systems, all of those sorts of things? What other 2? A corpus linguist who is going to help us with our narrative work, and the final one, a lead coordinator, probably the most high impact role. So in a kind of normal organization, this would be, I guess, the CEO. Like, I suppose at the moment we're kind of, we're a board, even though we're not structured in a traditional way. But so we're looking for a lead coordinator as well. And we've had some amazing applicants. And honestly, I'm just like, We are a volunteer-based organization. We have a needs-based salary. So it's not like what you would get in an NGO. We're quite, we don't want to become an NGO. I think that's a lot of where the problems are in terms of the non-profit industrial complex. And so, it's asking people to sacrifice in terms of having like a good salary, but we more than make up for it in terms of purpose. And so I think the fact that we've got these such great applicants, it really fills me with hope that there are people who are willing to devote their lives to something bigger than themselves. And yeah, it's really exciting.
Exciting times, and absolutely, especially when the future of human beings and indeed planet Earth depends on it. And planetary boundaries have been broached and breached mercilessly, and we still don't have to see don't seem to have it all together. And you mentioned this word social movements, and I know that we even titled this show as "What's Veganism Got to Do with Social Movements?" There's enough that I need to do explaining around intersectional veganism and how it's not just about this, but it's also about connecting the dots, and therefore why we do this show. Tell us a little bit about what is a social movement? Give us a couple of examples of and why you believe at Animal Think Tank that veganism, animal rights needs to be a social movement.
Right. Well, I think there's so many different definitions of what social movement is, but like an example that I think everybody can relate, or most people can relate to, is like Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion. It's diverse individuals, groups, organizations working towards some kind of social change. And the way that we actually conceptualize it in Animal Think Tank, which I think is quite unique, I think, and I think it's one of our sort of, I guess, the way that we look at things quite broadly is that we look at social movements and successful social movements as an ecology of change. And when you look at successful social movements like the civil rights movement or Indian independence, or so many of the changes that have happened in society have come about through collective action, mass protest, people actually being disruptive and sacrificing for the cause. But it's not just that piece. There's also lobbying and party politics. There is individual change, going vegan, leadership development, all sorts of things. And then there's also building alternative visions of the future. So co-housing projects, veganic farming. So all of these pieces are needed in a successful social movement ecology. And what we found, or what, in the UK, when we started, there really wasn't any organization that was doing sort of the mass protest, civil disobedience, the really disruptive type of action that is about shifting public opinion. And so that's kind of what we're focusing on right now. We're focusing on seeding a social movement organization for animal freedom. And we a year and a half ago, I think it was, we seeded Animal Rebellion, which your viewers may or may not have heard of, as a kind of ally to Extinction Rebellion, part of their movement of movements, to test out our theories. And also because there was an opportunity, and it's a growing opportunity because the climate issue is so urgent and people are so galvanized around it. And we saw an opportunity to actually bring the animal agriculture and fishing industry message and the plant-based food system message to the environmental movement. So now there is, a civil disobedience type of organization in the UK ecology, but we want to seed one which is an anti-speciesist one, not necessarily only about the environment.
Yeah, that's really interesting with all these diverse examples that you gave. When I think, having grown up in India and been exposed to the Gandhian philosophy of how India achieved its independence, you mentioned civil disobedience and, boycotting the industry and also doing it in a way which is through civic and civil, disobedience and not necessarily, waging war, which seems to be the vocabulary of, this military industrial complex that we all tend to define and describe our progress and growth, and which obviously is leading to planetary annihilation at this point. So that needs massive change. And in my previous conversations with you, Laila, you've mentioned this concept called theory of change. And I think that our viewers, many of them who run nonprofit organizations or for-profit vegan businesses and so on, they're just an activist and an advocate, and they really want to do something about this, and might want to think about it from an organizational standpoint. So what is Animal Think Tank's theory of change? And before you talk about that, just give us a little bit of an education around what is theory of change.
Well, I mean, I think theory of change, I can explain it very, very simply. It really is what it sounds like. It's what is our beliefs about how change is made. And I think the term actually comes from the development sort of industry. And I have been, and in many projects that I worked in, I don't think that they actually had explicitly understood or clarified how is it that we believe that change is made. It was just kind of like doing stuff, and similarly, I think what I've, in the animal freedom movement, many organizations haven't actually clarified what it is or how it is that they think change is made. And so when we're talking about the sort of social movement ecology framework, it is so useful for understanding the different theories of change that are happening. I mean, so veganism, there is an underlying assumption or theory of change that, well, individual change can lead to broader societal changes. The sort of mass protest, civil disobedience group, the theory of change is, power is held by the people. We give it away to, our power holders. We can reclaim that through not complying, and shift public opinion in the process, and then basically force politicians and power holders to kind of follow our lead and actually make changes because they're being forced to through increased public active and sort of passive public opinion. So there's lots of different theories of change, and then of course there's a theory of change if you're looking at sort of party politics and lobbying. It's kind of like, you're focusing on those on the system and changing the system from the inside. And I used to think, oh, well, no, we can't change things from the inside, and we can't change things through individual change. We just need structural change. Actually, all of it's needed. And for a really, I think, successful movement and movement ecology, you need all of those pieces in place, and there is a creative synergy that happens when everybody's kind of doing their thing and understanding what each of the other groups are doing. So there's not a I'm right and you're wrong, my way is better, your way is not good. It's understanding our place in the broader context, and that is a really, really important for us at Animal Think Tank. And different roles and different theories of change come to prominence at different points in the movement cycle. So often when you look at social justice movements that have been successful, the sort of takeoff stage, that's where your rebels, your direct action activists are, pushing the issue out into the public consciousness, and they're doing their thing. And then once they've got the public's attention and maybe the power holders' attention, that's when the kind of reformers or the NGOs or those who are used to interfacing with, policymakers, they come to the forefront to codify the changes that are being pushed for by the rebels. And so it's like, we all have a role to play in this movement cycle, and also in the ecology. And so that, I think that's our broader theory of change, that we need all of those things to create transformative change.
Yeah, it's very interesting. As you were talking about this, I was thinking about the challenger brand theory. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's frequently used in consumer marketing, consumer advertising, innovation, practical innovation, product innovation, kind of a landscape. And Adam Morgan, who's also based in the UK, was the author of the book called The Pirate Inside. And they talk about how there's a necessary level of piracy, that you need while you're working inside the larger establishment of the Navy, for example, and where that necessary rebellion needs to be seated, because if you don't, then the big established, the power holders that you were mentioning can get away with a lot of things, which may not be for the good of the society or the world at large. So he wrote The Pirate Inside. There was another book called Eating the Big Fish, which is the whole narrative of David versus Goliath, and how do you really take on this Goliath. And in the end, they came up with the Challenger brand theory, and you can be a challenger brand as long as you're challenging a dominant mindset, and that there's a role for every organization, and different types of organizations, to take the baton, so to speak, from another in that life cycle of change that you're talking about. So it's very interesting that there's I've been exposed to that in the corporate world, and I just so wish that we used this and all of those ideas that are already with us for true purpose, and not just for the purpose of profit, personal or financial. So okay, so to have the theory of change in place, the animal think tank is working on it. You've also in our conversations really emphasized the importance of organization building. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh my goodness, I could talk about this all day. This is what we have been focusing on at Animal Think Tank for the last, I guess, year and a half now. And it's kind of, before I got involved with Animal Think Tank, I wouldn't have known why it's important. I mean, maybe I would have intellectually known why it's important, but, governance and processes and systems, that sounds really boring. And yet it is absolutely fundamental to actually having organizations that last, to having cultures and creating conditions where people can thrive and bring their best selves, having clarity around who makes decisions, where authority lies. It's something that I think that many of us are not skilled in necessarily. We've had to do a lot of learning, and there's so much literature though out there that's really, really good and really, really helpful. But I think a lot of us have come from activist backgrounds. We have like a group of friends that we go and do actions with, and it's kind of like, well, we can figure stuff out. We don't need to write down the rules or any of those sorts of things. And I think our experience is that we started off as a group of, friends, I suppose, and we brought people on and wanted to grow, and we were all, friendly, and we're all good people, and, we should be able to work stuff out. And I think, one of our issues is that we probably grew quicker and we got more complex than our processes and systems would allow, and we didn't have any. And people have different levels of tolerance to uncertainty and not quite knowing what's going on and things. So I think what I found is like building those foundations of systems, process. And when I talk about systems, I mean, I can talk about very concretely what we've done. We have now developed a system for decision making, for conflict transformation, for resource allocation, for care, connection and support, and for information flow, and for feedback. And to make those things explicit and transparent so everybody kind of knows what's going on. Also making our roles really explicit and our accountabilities. Those are kind of like the hard systems, but also like our identity. Who are we? What do we value? And so we've spent a lot of time actually articulating what are our core values and what are the values that we need in order to actually achieve our mission. Actually, even getting a mission statement. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? That's the mission statement doesn't seem very long, but there's a lot of thinking and a lot of discussions and a lot of process that went on behind the scenes. And all of that is so important to get everybody on the same page and to make sure that we have a co-created and shared vision and everybody's kind of like, moving in the same direction. And then culturally, I think, so much of organization building is around culture, and that's my area. And I think we focus a lot on the doing and the work, and but I think I realized quite a while ago that it doesn't matter if we've got like 20 really, really smart people in the room. If they don't feel psychologically safe, if they don't trust each other, if you know, we can't bring our best selves, we can't bring our creative ideas, we can't take risks because of fear of criticism, judgment, etc. So, you know, and there's such a paradigm shift, I think, that we're trying to, I guess, prefigure the society that we want to see and actually incorporate that into our practices. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the means are the ends. So we also have to, like, you know, act and behave and you know, function in ways that are actually probably contradictory to a lot of the values and the ways of behaving in sort of more conventional, hierarchical, profit-driven corporations, let's say. And so there's a lot of unlearning that we've had to do, you know, just very simply, like thinking about how we deal with conflict and how we're so sort of conditioned to think in terms of right and wrong and good and bad, and a sort of punitive mindset around conflict and tensions, and shifting that to a more restorative or transformative approach to conflict. It's just like one example. Our approach to power, you know, in a lot of activist spaces, you know, we don't have any leaders and we're all equal. And so any kind of, I guess, somebody stepping into leadership over and above a certain point is kind of like, you know, dragged down a little bit. And actually, if we want to be powerful and win, we need everyone to step into their full power. We're not all equal. We have equal value, but we have different things to bring. And so I think unlearning and relearning a different way of approaching all of these things, it might not have seemed important to me a few years ago, but through experience, I think these are the things that we've been working on. And yeah, I feel like I really feel like we've spent a lot of time building sort of strong foundations to now be able to grow, I think, faster as a result of. And the final thing I'll say is so much of it depends on having like the right people. And I don't mean there's right people and wrong people, but people who fit with your vision and your values. And I think when we started, a year and a half ago, when we were bringing people on, I don't think we could properly articulate who we were and what we wanted and what we needed. And so maybe we made decisions based on who we connected with, or who, you know, plus skills and on all of that. But now I think we've got a much better idea of who we are, and so we can attract people who are attracted to the thing, you know, who we are, and having the right people makes life a lot easier. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, well, I do have a corporate for-profit kind of a background, and for many years, longer than I have been part of the nonprofit kind of a, you know, side of things. And I do agree, you know, a lot of activists bring a lot of passion, and they'll bring their wounds to the movement, and there's a lot of that. And sometimes, you know, what's missing is the rule book. Like, how are you going to do this? You know, it's great, you've got a lot of passion, you've got a lot of ideas, but how are we channeling that energy into something that it becomes executable, becomes implementable, and then you know, has the power of that unified vision behind it. And as you were talking, I was thinking about it's so important for the movement to organize, because who we're up against are hyper organized.
Yeah.
They are a very well-oiled machinery with you know, with the rule book written, I don't know, 100 years ago, as to how do you do innovation, how do you bring ideas to the fore, how are those debated, when do you do conversations of possibility, then you move on to conversations of feasibility, and then you get into gatekeeping and who's going to gatekeep that, and the ideas and theories of leadership also come up, you know, in terms of are you going to make it more sociocratic, are you going to make it more military command and control, and there's a lot of for-profit, you know, there's a lot of change that is going on right now in the for-profit world as well. You know, when you look at the country of Singapore, they've created a hub which actually focuses on sociocracy. more than on this traditional conventional idea of creating hierarchy. So there are many models out there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that at Animal Think Tank, you've taken the time to absorb the learnings you've had. You've invested the effort to codify vision, who we are, what are we doing, written out a mission statement that everyone can be behind, and not just be fueled with passion alone, but actually bring both passion and professionalism together. All right. So you've spoken about theory of change. You've spoken about organization building. What other projects are you involved at Animal Think Tank? Like, what's next? You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay. So I think what are we working on right now other than organization building? Well, we are focusing on developing our meta-narrative and our story-based strategy. And that is I think it's a really key part of our offering, hopefully, to the movement. We want to be strategic. And the idea is that we have some kind of a grand objective, and then can identify key strategic milestones in order to be able to achieve that objective. But I think that and that's quite conventional, sort of basic strategy. But there is this aspect of actually being guided by a narrative that can actually speak to people's existing values, rather than trying to superimpose a new set of values onto society. And the best way that I can sort of explain why or how this is important is the freedom to marry movement. So the kind of the LGBT movement in the US was not having a huge amount of success with the kind of rights-based narrative, because it wasn't resonating with half the population. But when they changed their narrative to, freedom to love, to commit, to have a family, I think within like 10 years or 11 years, they were able to succeed in terms of the right to marry. And I think, so we are trying to come up with what is the story that's going to reach people currently when it comes to animal freedom. And, the go vegan message is not going, we don't think it's the ideal message, because it actually, going against sort of liberal and sort of individualistic values of like the freedom of choice, basically. So we often joke that we're going to end up with a narrative of like, animal lovers or something like that. But that's kind of yeah. And I say this, there's a lot of, we want to do quite a bit of research around how people actually talk in different demographics, different sectors of society talk about animals currently. One of the roles we're advertising for is a corpus linguist who can actually do that research work. So I think that's quite an exciting project that we're on. So it's the story-based strategy, and that's also, we want to develop that in relationship and in collaboration with other organizations within the movement, because there's no point in us coming up with like what we think is a great narrative and nobody else is sort of buying into it. So it's kind of like, what is our equivalent of Black Lives Matter? Right. For the animal movement, that we can kind of, as a wider movement, sort of get behind. We don't have to get behind the exact right vision, like one vision, but it's like, what is the narrative that we can all get behind and push? So that's I think one of our main projects. Another one I think is with the
before you move on, I'm really excited about the meta narrative that you speak about. As a consumer behaviorist myself, this is something which is in the realm of behavior change, and it's very, very difficult to make that delta happen without understanding the vision, the values, what really takes triggers and barriers of certain demographics, your target audience, and coming up with that reframing. So my question, one question I was thinking about, there are many questions, always, and I know we can talk ad nauseum about so many different things, because it's just so exciting to talk to you about these things always. And I was thinking, does it have to be one meta narrative for all audiences, or would you be looking at
No.
narratives?
No, and I think also I just want to caveat this. This is not my area. We have a brilliant and very talented narrative lead who's looking after all of this. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. Don't quote me. But no, I think the idea is to have a meta-narrative, but then to have stories, stories that align with that meta-narrative that can speak to different sectors of society, different types of people. So I think, yeah, it's not like it's just going to be one thing and that's it. No. And I think there has to be continuous production of these stories, but as time goes on and as conditions change and as things happen, but still within that kind of framing, that very broad framing of a meta-narrative.
Right. And as you develop it, you also mentioned that it can't be developed or implemented in isolation, that you would be looking towards, other players. What is your vision of what are those types of organizations or groups that might help you in bringing this to life?
Yeah, so we are working with an organization called PERC that specialize in developing narratives for different types of movements, and their methodology includes having what they call hack days or stakeholder days. So we're actually planning one for before the end of the year to bring various organizations together. So that's in progress, and it would be, I guess, key influencer type organizations within the animal movement in the UK. We're very UK focused at the moment, with the aspiration that if we are successful, it will inspire, international kind of organizations to be set up and movements and such. So it's very much a work in progress. I can't give you great details on who would be involved, but it would be influential organizations or different parts of the ecology as well in the movement. So I guess representatives of those who would come to those stakeholder days and input and share their ideas, and also hopefully, buy into the approach.
Okay, great. We'll keep an eye out and watch for the space around Animal Think Tank to know more about how you're bringing that meta narrative to reality. You were talking about other projects before I rudely interrupted you.
No. Thank you. What else? I'm thinking about. There's something that around the organization building. We've learned so much, and we are currently creating an ATT handbook, which is going to have all of our systems and our processes and our policies and how we're doing things all in one place, and it'll be open source. And we're currently thinking about, it's not been decided, but doing like a kind of 10-day international training based on our experience. This isn't the right way; it's our way that we found that has worked. But we sort of feel like that would be something that would be a nice contribution to other organizations that maybe don't quite understand or know how to go about building foundations, and kind of they don't have to go through the 2 or 3 years of learning that we've had to go through, including the tensions and the conflicts and all the fallout and all the rest of it. So that's one thing that's kind of we're thinking about, an international training. And then the roles that we're recruiting for currently: social movement culture lead, political strategy. That's all around, okay, so what is the DNA and the foundations of this social movement organization that we're going to seed? And so we're kind of shifting gears from creating a strong foundation of Animal Think Tank to, okay, so we've now created an organization that can seed a social movement organization like Extinction Rebellion, like Animal Rebellion, like Black Lives Matter. And so I think we're really shifting gears into what is the DNA, what are the foundations of the movement. And so, for example, from a cultural perspective, that is like, what kind of conflict transformation system would local groups need? What are the principles and values of the wider movement? It might be based on what we've developed at ATT, but it has to be relevant to a sort of movement level. I think if we go by our sort of project plan, which it probably won't happen this way, but if all goes to plan, by next year, in a year's time, we would have developed those and we would have started seeding local groups in the UK. And the idea would be to do mass trainings, to train like maybe a 5-day kind of training for organisers and groups to set up and, you know, hand over the resources and also support and coach and what have you, groups all over the country who can then have the capacity to create, you know, their own local campaigns, but then also come together for strategic sort of national campaigns that we would help to coordinate. And so that's kind of like what we're aiming for, maybe in a year or year and a half's time. Yeah, I think those are the things. I haven't missed anything.
Oh, you're always working on so many amazing things, and I'm just so excited, you know, for all the stuff that you've shared and what's in store for the world to see once Animal Think Tank is ready to, you know, share, whether it's the influential, you know, animal rights organizations in the UK that you're going to make a call to, or it's this international training. Now, tell me, who would be the ideal recipient of this training? Would it be animal rights organizations, or, you know, can I raise my hand? I would love to be.
Oh, yeah, totally. Absolutely. No, I think, I don't know, because we haven't thought about it too deeply, but I think, you know, in my mind, it's those kind of smaller organizations that have great potential because they've got loads of passion but they don't quite know necessarily how to grow, how to, yeah, you know, it's, you know, if I was doing this on my own, it would be so difficult, like to know how to go about building my team, developing systems, etc. So I think it's the sort of the smaller organizations, but at the same time, you know, if people from, you know, larger sort of grassroots organizations like SAVE or DXC or whoever, like, I think it's really a call for anybody who actually sees the importance of having, like, building the foundations of organizations that can last, basically, rather than just sort of, you know, if you've got an ambition to last a long time and last the long haul so that we can actually, you know, to the point where we can win, then I think it would be very relevant to all types of organizations within the animal movement space.
Right. One of our broadcasters and broadcast partners is Plant Pure Communities, you know, and I'm on the Pod Advisory Council with them. And I know many people in the audience are pod leaders, and these are, you know, small pods. They want to do community work. They do a lot of community engaged lifestyle medicine work. Sometimes they're either physician led or activist led, or just, you know, somebody who has a powerful transformation story of their own, and they feel, you know, motivated to start a neighborhood thing, and then before they know it, you know, they're inviting other people and utter strangers into their home and teaching them how to cook, and, you know, sharing principles of veganism and the ethical aspects of it and so on. So so this is exciting news that, you know, people who are wanting to scale up, people who believe that now they're not just one but two but three and four and don't really know the path. This is an excellent opportunity, so we'll definitely keep an eye out for that from Animal Think Tank. Let's shift gears a little bit. You know, let's go back to your personal growth and you know, so my specific question is more like a leadership question to you. How has your own personal journey led you to step into your power, Laila?
Oh gosh, well, I haven't fully stepped into my power. I don't think, it's a total work in progress. I think, you know, I think when I think to kind of like the foundations or the roots of where I am now, like my parents played a really, really big role. I have the privilege of coming from a family that's really loving, but was also really focused on service, on giving generously of time and knowledge and those sorts of things. So I think I've grown up, you know, seeing my parents doing that and yeah, giving and making change in the world. And I think, you know, my parents have always, you know, instilled in all of us that we can do whatever we put our minds to. There's no limitation. I mean, there's the limitations that I put on myself, all the false beliefs and narratives and all the rest of it. And I think at the moment is a process of trying to unlearn some of those things. But I think I never really saw myself as a leader, in inverted commas. And I think it's really, I was an expert in my field, and had a, successful career, but it was still very much like focused on my expertise and not necessarily like holding space for others or developing teams or those sorts of things. So I think Animal Think Tank has really sort of pushed me into, I feel like I'm being called into something, and I think the fears and limitations that I might put on myself are kind of put into huge perspective by the cause that I'm working for, because all of my fears and all of the rest of it kind of pale into comparison when I think about the animals. And I think another sort of important aspect that I guess I'm really lucky to have a partner who is pretty fearless and thinks that he can do anything, doesn't care what anybody else thinks, and has gone on his own leadership journey. And he's, set up a big animal hospital, having no, formal training in business. He's an emergency and critical care vet, and it's grown from like 65 people to 190 people in the last 2 years. So I have been like walking that journey with him and just seen, I've learned so much by his way of being, and he has so much more faith in me than I do in myself. And so that kind of makes me want to step into that. So yeah, I think I'm realizing that if we're gonna win, if we're gonna make the changes in the world that we think are needed, then we have to step into the fullness of who we are. And I think as women, I think there's been all sorts of stories that have been told about how we should be, and probably how we think we should be, that we have to unlearn. And I'm in the process of doing that. And I sort of feel like as I continue down this path, I care less what other people think. I'm happy to I sort of feel like what I'm bringing is enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. The imposter syndrome sort of voice is getting, quieter and quieter as I realize that is just, the patriarchy. And I'm really motivated by the fact that without wanting to be and realizing that I am, I think, a role model for younger women in our organization and the people that we work with. So I have to be unapologetically myself, and that gives permission for others to be unapologetically themselves and bring their full selves. So that's what I am kind of working on at the moment. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, this is awesome. You mentioned how you're stepping into your own, right? And you're embracing your own self. And that is critical, because if we don't, then who will? And when others who look up to us, in our organizations or even outside of the organization, they've got to see us role modeling that unapologetic embracing of oneself.
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned was it's critical for women to support other women, because there's enough, with the patriarchy trying to pull us down anyway, right? So women supporting other women is critically important for the animal rights movement and the vegan movement, intersectional vegan movement, plant-based movement. I totally agree with you. Cannot emphasize this, anymore, because, well, when you look at the US, 79% of the animal rights activists here are women. So it is a women-led movement, and we are the face of it. And our voices deserve to be united, versus conflict and dragging somebody down and all of that, which are human tendencies. But I guess the movement calls for us to rise above that.
Yeah.
Laila, you want to say something else? We are running out of time, but
okay.
But I will let you have the last word. Tell us.
What was coming up for me then is that, the way that I used to think of leadership, I think, is a very masculine model of leadership, of individual kind of hero, savior, competition over collaboration, etc. And what I'm learning is a sort of more feminine way of leadership. It's relational, it's collaboration, it's not just using logic and rationality. There's a place for emotions and intuition. And if we want to win, if we want to build a powerful movement, we all have to be powerful individuals, and that looks different for everybody. And I kind of feel like we have to embody that if we want others to also embody that and have a leaderful movement.
Yes, exactly. And coming into our divine feminine, and embracing femininity and coming up with female leadership models, which can look very differently depending on, the person, because we've got to allow for personality and so on, but still find a way to make it collaborative versus the alpha male competitive, I'm top of the herd, call me the team lead. And if you don't call me the team lead, then, I'm not going to work with you, that kind of thing. And that conventional vocabulary, a lot of times we forget it is the male patriarchal conventional definition of leadership that's whispering into our ear, and sometimes we're unable to dissociate from it because we don't know what our model of leadership is. Laila Kassam, you're always an inspiration to talk with. And, every single time I have a conversation with you, I'm like, oh my God, I'm blown away. What is it that you can't do and you aren't doing? And it's, you've written the book. You've reminded me many times. You've co-edited the book. As far as I'm concerned, you're the author of it, but I take what how you want to characterize that. You've got a book, which is awesome. I invite our viewers to go check out the work that you've put in at inclusiveresponsibility.earth. I know you're no more accepting applications for Animal Think Tank for these roles, but there are other roles that might be up on your website. So whoever's interested anywhere in the world, please, definitely check it out, animalthinktank.org/join-us. And with that, Laila, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and I learned so much from you, and I hope our viewers also enjoyed listening to you today.
Oh, thank you, Nivi. It's been such a pleasure.